Undersecretary Marco Mijic, who is a new designee for California Health and Human Services Secretary Gali, and Deputy Secretary Moy Moreno Rivera, welcome, who is a new designee for California EPA, Secretary Garcia. With that, Matt, would you like to read the roll call, please?
Thank you. Director Sam Asefa.
Here.
Secretary Lourdes Castro Ramirez. Secretary Wade Crowfoot.
Here.
Secretary Tokes Omashakin.
Present.
Deputy Secretary Moises Moreno Rivera.
Here.
Deputy Secretary Virginia Jameson.
Here.
Undersecretary Marco Meach.
Here.
Public Member Nicole Capretz.
Here.
Public Member Frank Cardenas.
Here.
Chancellor Juan Sanchez Munoz.
Present.
For full attendance, thank you.
Great. So we move to item 3, which is the approval of the February 28, 2023 meeting minutes. Just want to remind my colleagues, members need not have attended these meetings to vote on the meetings, but may abstain. So with that, we'll also have an opportunity for council discussion, then public comments.
If members of the public would like to comment, actually, Director, do you mind if I go over the housekeeping script for public comment first?
Sure.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair, and everyone for joining us today, in person, online, or by phone through the Zoom webinar platform, or where the meeting is being live streamed on SGC's YouTube channel or Cal EPA's live webcast. I'm here to provide some information to help guide us all through the process for this hybrid meeting, which we have designed with the intention of maximizing access by members of the public. For those joining the webinar online via Zoom or by phone, please note that your microphone is automatically muted when you join. In order to minimize the risk of background noise, you will not be able to unmute your phone yourself. For those joining online via Zoom, please note that the webinar platform does not enable video for attendees, so we will not be able to see you. If you need technical assistance during the meeting or have a question about the meeting process, there are a few ways to contact us. If you're using the online Zoom webinar, the best way is by using the Q&A function. Several members of the SGC team are monitoring the Zoom Q&A function to facilitate public access to the council meeting and may remove disturbing or threatening content. If you have joined by phone and you have access to email, please email sgc.info@sgc.ca.gov. If you do not have access to email, you may text or call 916-634-3359. If you plan to make in-person public comment, you must fill out a comment card provided at the table near the back of the room. Please fill out the public comment card to indicate your name and which item on which you would like to comment. Please bring your comment card to the table at the front to my left, with the sign for collecting public comment cards. When the chair opens the public comment period for your item, we'll read the names of everyone who has submitted a form for that item. Please line up by the podium when I do so, in the order in which I've called your name. When it's your turn to speak, I'll call your name to the podium. If you're planning to make remote public content, you must be joining the meeting via Zoom, either through your desktop or phone, or by calling in. To make a public comment, visit sgc.ca.gov/meetings and complete the public comment form linked there. You'll need to complete separate forms for each item on which you wish to speak. You may complete a form at any time during the meeting. When the chair opens the public comment period for your item, we'll read the names of everyone who submitted a form for that item. When you hear your name, please raise your hand. To do this online in the Zoom webinar, click the raise hand under the participants menu. To raise your hand by phone, you press *9. When it's your turn to speak, a member of our team will unmute your microphone. If you're online, you'll see a window pop up alerting that the host is unmuting you. You'll need to click the option to approve unmute, and after that, you can begin your comment. If you're on the phone, you'll hear a recorded message alerting you that your line is unmuted. Please begin your comment after you hear the recorded message. If you're unable to complete the online form but would like to make a public comment, please email sgc.info@sgc.ca.gov. Each speaker will have a maximum of 2 minutes to make their remarks. Speakers requiring or using translation services are allotted 4 minutes to facilitate full participation. A timer will be screen shared. Please monitor that timer and wrap up your remarks accordingly. Whether you're online or on the phone, you'll be notified when your time is up. After that, we will mute your microphone. You do not need to take any additional action once we mute your microphone. Thank you all for your participation, and I hand it back to you, Chair.
Great, thanks for getting us back on track. We'll now discuss the meeting minutes. Any discussions from council? There's a motion. Any second?
The motion.
So with that, go to public comments.
We have no public comment on this item.
Great, so we have a motion and second. Roll call.
Director Acefa,
Yes.
Secretary Castro Ramirez, Secretary Crowfoot, Secretary Omashakin,
Yes.
Deputy Secretary Moreno Rivera,
Yes.
Deputy Secretary Jameson,
Yes.
Undersecretary Meach, Public Member Capretz, Public Member Cardenas,
Yes.
Chancellor Munoz.
Aye.
Motion passes.
Great, we'll move to item 4, and I would now like to introduce SGC's superb Executive Director, Lynn Bangkok-Libert, for the Executive Director's report. And then following that, her presentation will have the opportunity for council discussion, then public comments.
Thank you so much, Chair Acefa. Good afternoon, Council. It is so nice to see you all today, and members of the public as well. Thank you for joining us. So a couple things to share with you before we begin the action items today. So first, very, very excited to share that our Strategic Growth Council and Office of Planning and Research summer internship program is getting started. We are hiring for approximately 10 summer interns. We'll be doing 10-week paid internship programs. This will be the second year that we have been running this program, and it helps us meet part of our workforce diversity goals and employment pipeline by offering these paid opportunities. So for those who may be interested in applying, please look at our website and at the careers page for more information, and the applications are due on May 14th. So secondly, I have another exciting announcement to share, and that is earlier this month, the Cities of Needles, who is one of the SGC Boost communities, received the Pro Housing designation. So this is incredibly exciting and a very, very important designation offered by the Department of Community Development and Housing that recognizes cities that are going above and beyond to help meet the state's housing goals. Now, the Boost program, it provides customizable and tailored support to each participating jurisdiction, and the flexibility of this technical assistance model enabled Boost to work collaboratively with the City of Needles on their housing goals and be creative around what pro housing looks like within a small and rural jurisdiction. So now with this designation, the City of Needles is now eligible for funding incentives and additional resources through state grant programs, and will help speed the production of housing. So congratulations to the City of Needles. Next, as we have been working through the aftermath of the Catalyst Conference, we have had so many exciting opportunities and initiatives and work that has come from this convening. So to help us be able to coordinate the opportunities, the resources, the partnerships that have formed as part of this conference, we are starting to reorganize around a new initiative that we're calling the Connecting Communities Initiative. And what this will largely look like will be an update to our website where we will begin to curate information, resources, technical assistance, solution, and tools that can help funders, communities, or those who are looking for inspiration on how to be part of the implementation of the California climate budget, as well as the Justice 40 initiative at the federal level. And so we'll start by retailoring the Models Hub page to really incorporate a lot of the work that we're seeing across the Strategic Growth Council, the council agencies, and then also the many partners that participated in the Catalyst Conference have continued to work together to come up with new solutions and opportunities and tools to help matchmake, bring in resources, provide information and awareness to help be able to achieve these important Justice 40 implementation and state of California goals. So we will share more of this to come as we continue to make progress on the Connecting Communities initiative. Now, I'd like to also provide an update on the Strategic Growth Council's Racial Equity Action Plan, more commonly known as the REAP. So our first REAP was adopted by the Strategic Growth Council in 2019, and it was closed out formally in our October 27th, 2022 council meeting. Now, while previous REAPs have aimed to normalize racial equity across Strategic Growth Council and the updated plan prioritizes operationalizing and institutionalizing racial equity strategies through SGC leadership, program, and our operations. So I'd like to take a few minutes to share some new areas for the REAP that we're looking forward to beginning the implementation on this summer and fall. So the first highlight is advanced pay for SGC grant programs. Additionally, alignment with existing state-led racial equity advancement initiatives, the advancement of community compensation strategies, the increased and improved engagement with tribes and tribal serving entities in California, and key impact statements and metrics that will be specific to each SGC initiative. So as we have, I hope, continued to communicate, racial equity is a top strategy and priority for the Strategic Growth Council. And we see our REAP as an accountability tool and a statement of intent to ensure that SGC programs address barriers and improve outcomes for our priority communities. So the work at SGC and across the many state departments and agencies who are also implementing REAPs reflects a dedication to advance racial equity through intentional investment, cross-sector collaboration, and dedicated staff capacity. Now, for my final update today, I would like to give an update on the Council Priority 1, which was the Racial Equity Resource Hub. So this was established by this council in November 2021 after the council approved an update to the existing racial equity resolution. This specific update directed the staff to develop and maintain a racial equity resource hub to support more rapid and coordinated strategies to address racial equity. The hub was formally launched in April of 2022, and now it provides a one-stop shop to access and share information, data sets, tools, racial equity action plans, and other racial equity initiatives being led across the state. Now, this hub differs from traditional resource library in that it curates resources that are created by racial equity practitioners for use within the state and local governments. And as such, these resources are designed to be more easily replicated and utilized by other practitioners. So now that we're reaching our 1-year mark, we wanted to report back on progress and use of the hub. So first, the hub currently hosts over 80 resources. And we are on track over the next 2 months to have one blog post from each council member sharing detailed updates from their agency or organization, and we'll start that cycle again this summer. We have received over 7,500 page views on the hub and over 400 downloads of the products and information available there. In our next update, I'm really excited to share that we'll have an additional 20 resources, and for the first time, this will include non-state generated resources. So principally coming from cities and counties around the state of California. I think it's important to also give some more anecdotal information about how partners around the state are using the hub. So first, the Resource Hub has helped an external health and environmental justice organization in conducting a statewide equity landscape project meant to support uptake of racial equity initiatives within California and across the country. Second, the Health and All Policies Task Force members have shared that in addition to amplifying their racial equity tools and resources, the Resource Hub has created a mechanism for sharing their racial equity work and an incentive and initiatives with the public more widely. This has brought further transparency and accountability to this work. And finally, we are hearing from agencies and departments that as they're developing their own racial equity action plans, they've utilized the Resource Hub to learn from what others have put forth in their respective REAPs to inspire their own commitments and goals. So the Health and Equity Program team within the Strategic Growth Council is now fully managing this work. And they have also been providing presentations and updates across many different state agencies, task force, working groups. And I just really want to close by thanking the council champions, Secretary Omashakin, Director Radhakrishna, and Chancellor Munoz for your leadership in making this first council priority such a successful team and state effort. It was an incredible idea at the beginning, and to see how much progress we've made in 1 year is really inspiring. So thank you for your leadership in bringing forward this resource to the state. And last but not least, I just also want to say happy birthday to Jessica Cervantes, who was one of our team members from the Community Resiliency Center. So thank you for being here with us on your birthday. And with that, I'll conclude our remarks and turn back to you, Chair.
We have no public comment on this item.
Sorry. Oh, I will now initiate council discussion. I'll just start by saying I'm so excited to see our priority number one finally, getting to this stage. It is an incredible resource that the team put together especially for state agencies and others to really access. And it is also a live document that gets continuously improved. In the context of the governor's executive order to agencies around equity plan and embedding equity into all of our work, I think this is one step in supporting that effort, so that we, all of our agencies, don't have to reinvent, questions around what equity means and what are the issues, and some of the action plans that are listed are also incredible resources in helping get agencies truly embed equity in their work. It's this kind of work that is truly transformative. I know we talk a lot about, as institutional racism or structural racism. What it means to change it is to really, truly sort of have action items that actually move the ball forward. So I think I'm really excited how this has really resulted in creating the hub, the resources. It's easy to access, and I'll encourage everybody to look at the website. Incredible amount of information, 80 or so. So I'll stop there. Wait.
Thanks, Sam. I just want to echo the compliments to the development of this hub. And I'll mention that I think since this hub was created, the governor established the executive order that directs all agencies and departments across the state to develop these equity action plans. And the hub can be so helpful to avoid reinventing or inventing the wheel across what are literally hundreds of state departments. So, Sam, one suggestion would be at a cabinet meeting that we hold with the governor and the governor's office to have you and Lynn perhaps give a bit of a guided tour of the resource hub to make sure that all departments are aware of the resources. And I'm with you, I think we've all effectively raised this up as a priority. Now the work is operationalizing it and institutionalizing it, or what I think a lot of people refer to as embedding equity. And so I'm really excited and interested to understand really what are the best practices across these departments that we can make into common practices. I've said that before, but I think the measure of our performance on equity is not really about lifting it up, although that's part of it, but really outcomes and what actions are driving outcomes. And this resource hub can be very helpful. So thank you.
Great, thanks for the feedback, Wade. Anyone? Nicole?
I echo everything that's already been said. And just curious, do you have any way of knowing if local governments have taken advantage of the hub or any? I mean, I don't know what feedback you could get necessarily, but I'm interested.
That's such a great question. I don't think we're able to get that level of information through the web analytics, but that would be something that maybe we could do a survey to try to understand use outside of the state.
Because they really need the support and best practices. So yeah, thank you.
I'm not sure that, thank you, Chair, that I'm going to add much more to the eloquence of Secretary Crowfoot. But let me just say, whether it's the hub or the action plan or the different programs, this unrelentingly deliberate effort to sort of capture this optic of equity and inclusion across the programs. This is the most recent sort of demonstration of that foci. Is really quite remarkable. To Wade's point, we have programs. Everyone has programs. What are the outcomes of the programs? And so often, one of the reasons that sort of even agents of equity change experience fatigue because of the redundancy of programs and the failure to illustrate actual sort of outcomes. And so, these efforts here to sort of centralize, to align, to update, right? It's not just a hub, but what the hub looks like today, what it looks like in 2024, what it looks like, to Member Caprice's point, how are other people using it? It's just terribly important. And people are inspired by outcomes, by movement, by improvement. And the better we can align these efforts and then have a centralized entity, whether it's SGA, this hub, or that people can refer to with confidence, will really provide a different kind of platform. And it takes work and imagination and leadership. And you, Lynn, and your team have demonstrated all three.
Folks.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I completely agree with the former three comments, including what the Chancellor just shared there, that said so very well. Look, tools are important, and this is a great tool that you and the team have helped put together here. But I think, like it's been echoed, we have to continue to push to get to a place where more systems are changing because of the tool. Not just to lift up the tool, but how does it create the change that we really want to see down the line as well? And I'm excited about this. I was honored to be one of the champions for this priority, but it's not mission accomplished yet, is what I want to leave behind for us on this. Thank you.
Thanks, folks. I agree. It's just a beginning, not end. Lord.
I agree with everything that has been said and said so well. Just a few other remarks that I would make. First, your report was great, good, steady progress that we're making in many areas in terms of the racial equity hub. I know from our agency, we do rely on having a place where best practices and approaches and programs are being shared. And so it is definitely a resource that is augmenting the work that agencies are doing. As Secretary Crowfoot mentioned, both in commitment as we implement the equity executive order that the governor signed, but also our commitment, right, to ensure that the communities that we're serving, particularly individuals that for many reasons either continue to be left behind or are still having a very difficult time navigating through the services and programs that we're providing. So agree with my colleague, Secretary Mashakin, that let's continue doing more to ensure that our outcomes are good, but also that we understand who's accessing programs and who's not accessing programs. And then the second point, I just wanted to lift up the pro-housing designation. Lynn, you mentioned the city of Needles. Very excited, of course, always to see how our investments in a State Department or state agencies is complementing and coming together with other efforts. We are up to 22 local jurisdictions that have the pro-housing designation. And this is very much focused on recognizing local leaders, local jurisdictions that are essentially going above and beyond in terms of their commitment to saying yes to housing, to saying yes to more housing that's affordable, to saying yes to addressing the supply of deeply affordable housing to address the need that we have in terms of people experiencing homelessness. So we hope to see more. I'm excited about the opportunity to learn about how SGC and the Housing and Community Development Department may be able to leverage the process that applicants go through ASIC and other programs with the work that HCD is doing to not only provide technical assistance, but also to encourage more cities to take advantage of the level of support that we're providing so that they may be able to revise their local policies, revise their land use policies to demonstrate the level of commitment to housing that we hope to see. We're up to 22. We have many more to go, but appreciate you highlighting how important the pro-housing designation has been. Thank you.
Just to echo everybody's support, I think to Secretary Crowford's point, I think it'd be also great to have you come to the undersecretaries meeting. The cabinet is great, but the undersecretaries are the doers. And so
Where the work gets done.
we would welcome you to come, Lynn, to present to the undersecretaries. And we've been having a lot of conversation around the governor's executive order in the undersecretaries world around how do we truly get to the point of embedding equity in all that we do? So it's not just a check the box thing, but really it's part of who we are as an organization. The other thing I will say is that I think there's also an opportunity to think about how you disseminate this through existing programs and mechanisms. So one thing we've been trying to do purposefully is think about grantees or grant applications or contracts that we're pushing out where we're making linkages to the hub in a more intentional way to be able to get further and deeper into the community. And so I think it's upon all of us who are part of SGC to really think about low-hanging fruit of ways in which we point to this as a resource to local communities, to the comment made earlier. The last thing I will say is we've also been trying to educate our own team. We're an employer of 34,000 people across the state of California. And I think we've been trying to think about if we're going to be meaningfully moving the needle on equity in an intentional way, we have to look inward and make sure our own people are prepared for this conversation. And so it has been a really important resource for us to share across our organization. And I would encourage kind of others and for you to help us further disseminate that information internally to build that capacity up.
Great, thanks for great feedback. Peñas?
Mr. Chair, thanks. From the perspective of our public, what an enlightened and enlightening moment we have arrived at when the heads of massive state bureaucracies can only talk about, but also demonstrate how they are embedding and driving within their humongous organizations the values and the virtues that have made our nation great. One need only look at Brother Wade's most recent entry in the Racial Equity Hub blog to see specific examples of how he and his team are driving these types of virtues in his organization, or what Secretary Lourdes penned in the blog from last October and November, with specific examples, specific measurable examples of how she and her team are driving virtues of equity throughout their organization. It's breathtakingly encouraging to be able to see demonstrations of your commitment. I think it speaks a lot about your appointing authority. Thank you. Frankly, thank you.
Great feedback. Anyone else?
I think as being an equity lead within the Environmental Protection Agency and the Resource Agency where I was, I think one of the important pieces is knowing who to contact. I think one of the key elements here is a member of the public or an interagency work group, right? SGC has a current existing racial equity work group, how we provide information as to who folks can go to, right? So when I see a resource and I want to have a follow-up or I want to learn more about it and kind of break down those barriers, I think it's one of those key elements of who's that face or who's that person that I could contact behind that policy or that best practice. I think it's instrumental for folks that are that are doing the work on a day-to-day to also know how they could break those barriers and who they can reach across. So I think this is another opportunity where we make that a little bit clearer, or we have an element there. But other than that, I echo what council members have shared. This has been instrumental for a lot of departments, and at the same time, it's been instrumental for folks doing the work to to learn and to know that there's a community out there and that they're not alone doing this work. So it's just reaffirming that what they're doing and the work that's being done is moving in the right direction.
Great, thanks for that feedback. We'll list Lynn's personal cell number as a point of contact.
Sam, can I make one more quick suggestion, which is SGC has demonstrated its ability to convene. That Catalyst conference from everyone's report was incredible. And I think Marco is right on the money with, we're getting that message from the governor and the legislature. We're sending that message on the importance of this, but it's really ultimately takes time and can be difficult to translate into these huge organizations. And even today, I encounter in our agency, parts of our very big, broad agency where this is not necessarily lifted up as a priority. So I do think the SGC potentially could be a convener across our agencies on, again, best practices towards getting, operationalizing, institutionalizing this deeper into our organizations, because I think I lack visibility on really understanding if it's hitting the road, and if you took a random survey of people across our 26 departments deep in the depth chart, where if they're even hearing the message. So I think that could be a good convening role.
Great feedback.
I'm wondering, Lynn, are you all participating in the communities of practice, the committees that have been created as part of the implementation of the executive order that attempts to do that, right? Cross-agency collaboration.
Thank you. We do have members, Kiran Kumar and others are assigned into some of those working groups, yes. So, but to the point around how can we do this more broadly, we will think through that and come back with a solution.
Great. Anyone else? I just want to recognize under Deputy Secretary Darwin Savi on behalf of Secretary Omar Shep to step out.
Thanks. I'll be here for about 30 minutes while this is gone, but I think he's leaving a little bit early today as well. So you'll see more of me. We'll keep switching in and out.
Great. We'll now open it up to public comments if there are any.
We have no public comment on this item.
We are on the consent calendar. I'm going to call Lynn for this. Great.
Thank you, Chair. So I'll just be very quick on this because there are detailed reports on the 3 items in the consent calendar in the summary report. But I wanted to just connect a couple dots for the council because with 2 of the items on the consent, the round 1 for the Community Resiliency Center program and also the round 9 for the Sustainable Agricultural Land Conservation program, we had really robust conversations with council on both of these guideline developments prior to the stakeholder comment and then through the guideline development. And I just wanted to highlight a couple things before moving towards the recommendation for consent calendar approval. So first, with the Community Resiliency Center program, we received so much direction and feedback around the need to have flexibility and to be able to.
Lynn, can you move the mic a little closer?
Oh, yes. Is that
Thank
okay?
you.
Thanks. Okay. So we received a tremendous amount of feedback from council and stakeholders around flexibility and being able to build these centers in a way that respond and reflect community need at the time. So you'll see in the way that these come forward, there is the inclusion of project development grants in addition to the planning grants and implementation grants that you're more used to seeing. And then also you'll see a lot of flexibility as it relates to partnerships, award ranges, and project requirements across the whole program. So we're really excited for this new program, and we'll be monitoring very closely, of course, the first round to trial and to document how some of these innovations that are built into this first round roll out. And for the Sustainable Agricultural Land Conservation Program, There was also a goal around maintaining consistency, knowing that a lot of these projects getting to acquisition takes many, many years. And so to have consistency, but also to make refinements that really make sure that we're being inclusive and bringing in everybody into this program who wants to be part of an acquisition grant. So a couple of the changes that I think really focus in on the council comment and direction were around supporting tribes in the development of 501c3 organizations to increase the avenues which they can access the program, to reduce the match requirement for easements from 25% to 10% to be able to provide better access and get to acquisition faster, and then also to provide 100% funding for planning applications that benefit priority populations. So I just wanted to flag those things because I think that they're really unique and directionally focused on some of the institutional ideas that the council has been asking us to think through. So pending council approval on the consent items, the SALC notice of funding available would be released today, and the Community Resiliency Center notice of funding would be released in May. And then both of these programs would close applications in fall, and we would bring recommendations for award to the council in December of this year. And thank you.
Great, thanks, Lynn. I want to remind council members in the public that the consent agenda is typically for non-controversial items. With that, I'll open it up to any questions or questions from the council.
I move to approve.
Is a motion from Marco. Any second?
Second.
Oops. Thank you, Chancellor. Second. Roll call, Matt.
We have public comment on this item.
Oh, sorry, there is public comment.
So I will begin the public comment period by reading the names of everyone who signed up to comment on this item, which is item 5 on the agenda. We'll have in-person public comment first. And we have one public comment in person. Bob Hill.
Hi, good afternoon, Chair Safa and council members. My name is Bob Hill. I am the Sustainability and Natural Resources Official for the City of San Luis Obispo. It's a pleasure to be before your council today. We just have this brief consent item here that is the letter C, and which is a funding augmentation for an existing sustainable ag land conservation grant that we have. First and foremost, I'd like to say how appreciative we are of our existing grant facility. This is a project that's very important for our community. We've been working on it since first conversation with the property owners well over a decade ago. And we're getting close to being at the finishing line. It's a 1,000-acre property that is immediately contiguous with the City of San Luis Obispo's municipal corporate boundary, and is also contiguous with Cal Poly San Luis Obispo as well, providing really outstanding opportunities for education. Should your council move the consent item today, we would have all the funding we need to complete the project. And so we're really appreciative of your consideration of our item today. Thanks very much.
Great, thank you.
That concludes public comment on this item.
Great, so there is a motion from Marco and second from Chancellor Munoz. Could you do a roll call?
Thank you. Director Asef?
Yes.
Actually, we had another public comment that may have come in at the very last minute. 1 sec.
Sure.
Olivia? You may begin your public comment. Olivia, are you with us?
Yes. Hi, can you
You
hear
may
me?
begin. Yes, we can. You have 2 minutes.
Thank you. First, sorry. First, I would like to thank SGC staff for their hard work and intentionality throughout this process. The CRC program team has been helpful throughout the entire process and has clearly worked hard to create guidelines that are equitable and accessible to disadvantaged communities. We greatly appreciate the additional point offered for rural and unincorporated communities, which are often disproportionately experiencing the effects of the climate crisis, but have the fewest resources to build resilience. This is a crucial step towards building equitable resilience in California. Relatedly, we want to address the mechanism for achieving geographic diversity. In addition to funding a project in each of the 6 Cal OES regions, we want to emphasize that projects should be prioritized for funding in regions like the San Joaquin and Eastern Coachella Valleys that are some of the most under-resourced and impacted by the climate and most impacted by the climate crisis in terms of extreme heat, wildfire smoke, and flooding, among other impacts. We did want to request clarification on the definition of priority communities, as the guidelines are written in a way that could be interpreted that for tribal, rural, and unincorporated communities to be considered priority communities, they must be located in qualifying census tracts. We believe that the intent was to include tribal, rural, and unincorporated communities that themselves meet the criteria, but are not in qualifying census tracts, and would appreciate either a clarifying footnote or clarification memo to ensure that disadvantaged unincorporated communities that are not in qualifying census tracts are still able to qualify as priority communities. Finally, we appreciate the efforts to make the requirements more flexible so that lower capacity communities that need resources are still able to apply. And we look forward to continuing to work with SGC staff to ensure that resources are targeted to communities that need it most. And sorry, I forgot to say at the beginning, but my name is Olivia Seidman, and I'm the Climate Policy Coordinator with Leadership Council for Justice and Accountability. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, great. So should we do roll call?
Sure. Director Acefa,
Yes.
Secretary Castro Ramirez,
Yes.
Secretary Crowfoot,
Yes.
Deputy Secretary Musavi,
Yes.
Deputy Secretary Moreno Rivera,
Yes.
Deputy Secretary Jameson,
Yes.
Undersecretary Meach,
Yes.
Public Member Capretz,
Yes.
Public Member Cardenas,
Yes.
Chancellor Munoz.
Aye.
Motion passes.
Great. So moving on to item 6. This is an action item to approve the nominees recommended by SGC staff to serve on the California Agricultural Land Equity Task Force. I'm really excited about this. I would like to invite Executive Director Lynn Blanco-Glibert again and Special Projects Analyst Sean Kennedy to present this item. Then we'll have public comment first, followed by council discussion.
Thank you, Chair. So this is a new task force for the Strategic Growth Council. As a reminder, this was created in the 2022 California budget, and the task force has a couple key requirements. The first is that it will meet at least quarterly over a 3-year period, and in that time frame, we'll be working to submit a report to the legislature and the governor that includes a set of policy recommendations on how to equitably increase access to agricultural lands for food production and traditional tribal agricultural uses. So over the past couple months, our team, in coordination with the Governor's Office of Tribal Affairs, CDFA's Farm Equity Advisor, and the California State Board of Food and Agriculture, has conducted a rigorous nomination and review process to bring forward a slate of candidates for your consideration. So with this, I would like to turn it over to Sean Kennedy, Special Project Analyst, who has been leading this effort for the Strategic Growth Council.
Good afternoon, Chair and Council members. So just to continue, as Lynn was saying, we could go to the next slide, please. So in the budget, the task force stipulated it will consist of a regionally diverse group of individuals with specific roles included within that I have listed up on the slide: Native and tribal liaisons, a land trust representative, individuals with expertise in issues affecting socially disadvantaged farmers and ranchers, individual with expertise in agricultural land acquisition and finance, State Board of Food and Ag member, a farm worker representative, a beginning farmer, CDFA Farm Equity Advisor, and an individual from CDFA's BIPOC Farmer Advisory Committee, which is currently being established. Next slide, please. So with that in mind, in late 2022, we initiated a 2-month public nomination process. The nomination was communicated out via SGC channels and also accompanied by targeted outreach to approximately 40 CBOs, advocacy groups, and academic institutions engaged in issues directly relevant to the task force across California.
Through that process, we were tracking the geography of nominees as they were coming through. We identified a gap in the Central Valley, so then proceeded to reopen nominations and received an additional 7 through that process. Next slide, please. So this is a brief snapshot of the entire nominee pool of the self-identified characteristics that came through. We had strong representation from nominees identifying as Black, Latinx, Indigenous, and Pacific Islanders, also from persons of marginalized genders and beginning farmers. There's a notable gap here in Native and tribal representation. This is something that we are committed to addressing through engagement with the Native and tribal liaisons we have serving on the task force. Next slide, please. Here's a snapshot of the geographies represented by the nominees. Again, this is the entire nominee pool. Nominees were able to self-identify their geographic representation. So we had some, as you can see at the top, representing the state as a whole, others representing much smaller geographies. And this is with the updated data following the reopening of the nomination for the Central Valley. Next slide, please. So part of the review process, so this was conducted by SGC, as I said, in partnership with CDFA's Farm Equity Advisor. We did invite participation from a review advisory committee, which was comprised of members of the public with expertise directly relevant to the work of the task force. This body was directed to follow the council's directions in evaluating the submissions as they came through. So, next slide, please. Now to the fun part of introducing the task force nominees. I should say just before, I'm going to introduce each member very briefly, or the nominees very briefly, just by name and title. But we're really excited with this group and the breadth and depth of expertise that they bring from across the state in many of the complex areas that are related to this issue of land equity. Next slide, please. So for our Native and tribal liaisons, SGC staff recommend Cheyenne Stone of the Big Pine Paiute tribe, Emily Begano, head seed keeper of Ipai Nation of Santa Isabel, and Lawrence Harlan, treasurer of the Fort Bidwell Indian Community Council. Next slide. Staff recommend 3 individuals with expertise in issues affecting socially disadvantaged farmers or ranchers. Lorena Iniguez, owner and operator of Ebby's Organic Farm on the Central Coast. Nelson Hawkins, who's here in West Sacramento, founder of We Grow Urban Farm. And Dr. Ruth Darquist Willard, Small Farms and Specialty Crops Advisor of the UC Cooperative Extension in Fresno and Tulare counties. Next slide. For the individual with expertise in agricultural land acquisition and finance, staff recommend Leah Schwartzman, Senior Program Manager of California FarmLink. Staff recommends Irene Barrecoa, Director of Operations of Lideres Campesinas as the farm worker representative, and Nathaniel Brown, also here in Sacramento area, who's the owner-operator of Brown Sugar Farm as the beginning farmer representative. Next slide. For the Land Trust representative, staff recommend Dorian Payan, Director of Holistic Land Relations at the Sustainable Economies Law Center. Staff also recommend, per the statute, California Department of Food and Ag Farm Equity Advisor, Thea Rittenhouse. And finally, the recommendation of the State Board of Food and Agriculture member is Doria Robinson, who serves as Executive Director of Urban Tilth in Richmond. So next steps, the final step, as I said in the nomination process, is to identify the representative of the CDFA BIPOC Farmer Advisory Committee, which we will bring to council for approval once that body is established. Following confirmation of the nominees, SGC staff will conduct introductory meetings with each task force member to better understand each member's aspirations and expectations for their role in the task force. We'll also, as Lynn mentioned, this is established as a Bagley-Keene body, so SGC staff will provide Bagley-Keene training for all task force members and develop briefing materials. And the first meeting, which we're excited to schedule, tentatively scheduled for June 2023. This meeting will focus primarily on procedural aspects of the task force, including election of a chair and co-chair, charter and bylaws, and the process for travel reimbursement and per diems for members, much of which is required for a Bagley King body. So with that said, next slide. SGC staff recommend that council appoint the nominees recommended by SGC staff to serve on the California Agricultural Land Equity Task Force. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Sean. Matt, do you want to find it for?
Does somebody
public
need to make the motion, Matt?
We will need a motion. We have public comment on this item.
Yeah, I would like to go to public comments first on this.
Thank you. I will begin the public comment period by reading the names of everyone who signed up to speak. We will have in-person public comment first. We have 2 in-person public comment, and then we'll move to virtual public comment. We have 1 virtual public comment on this item. For in-person public comment on this item, we have Jamie Fanous and Beth Smoker. If you could please come up to the podium.
Before that, I just want to clarify, council members, I think at the chair's discretion, you can take public comments first. In this case, I think it is an important topic and issue, and it would be valuable to hear from the public before we take action. So sorry, with that.
Our first speaker is Jamie Fanous.
Hi, everyone. Yeah, my name is Jamie Fanous. I'm with the Community Alliance with Family Farmers. We represent around 8,000 small and underserved farmers across the state of California. I'm the policy director at CAF. And yeah, I just want to communicate like strong support for this task force. I cannot over communicate how excited we are. It's a really amazing opportunity to actually deal with the biggest issue that small and underserved farmers are facing right now in order to be successful. So we're really excited about it and want to communicate that as much as I possibly can. I also want to express that talk about some stipend limitations that have been kind of brought up to our attention. We've been made aware that there's some statutory barriers that would limit the stipends to $100 per meeting, which we believe is insufficient. We'd like to stress the importance of providing stipends at around $500 per meeting at minimum. And these funds are essential in order to actually make sure that primarily our socially disadvantaged communities can actually be present in these spaces, which they historically have not had access to. We know that there's funding available. We also know that you all and SGC staff are willing and amenable to making these shifts, but there's some statutory barriers in order to repair and address these kinds of limitations. So yeah, I just want to bring up that piece and communicate how excited we are, and it's a really big deal. So I hope you all are as thrilled as we are. Thank you.
Thank you. Our second in-person public comment is Beth Smoker.
Hi, good afternoon. I'm Beth Smoker. I represent the California Food and Farming Network. I'm their policy director. We're a network across the state of California that has over 50 member organizations that work on everything from anti-hunger issues, farm worker labor issues, public health, and sustainable ag. And here to also express with a great enthusiasm, excitement for all of the nominated task force members, and to just again reinforce, like, this is a pretty monumental moment that we're taking on and tackling this really big issue. We're especially excited to see that there's 3 tribal and native land stewards on the task force, as that's an incredibly, land was stolen from these populations, and they have historically and currently are still excluded and really deserve a seat at the table. So really happy to see 3 representatives there. And then I'll just echo my colleagues' point around the stipends. We're also in alignment with the $500 per meeting stipend, and know that SGC staff have intention for equitable stipends, and that it's purely a statutory issue, even that we have an understanding that there's also there are funds allocated for this. And so would really encourage removal of that, or to get over that hurdle together. Yeah, thank you.
That concludes our in-person public comment. We have two virtual public comment. For our first virtual public comment, we have Megan Thomas. Megan, are you with us?
I am. Thank you. I have a video.
You have 2 minutes. You may begin.
Okay, thanks very much. It's great to be here addressing this group. My name is Megan Thomas, pronouns she, her. I'm the president and CEO at Catalyst of San Diego and Imperial Counties. I'm situated and our work takes place in the traditional and unceded territory of the Kumeyaay people at the southern border region of the state of California. And I think this gets me video.
Megan, are you still with us? Sounds like we're having technical difficulties. I think we'll move next to Hector. Hector?
Oh. Did you want me to?
Welcome back.
Okay, thanks. I went to panelist and disappeared. Okay. Hello again. So we're situated and work in the traditional and unceded territory of the Kumeyaay people in the southern border region of our great state, land that also extends into northern Baja California, as do our people. Catalyst of San Diego and Imperial Counties, if you're not familiar, is a community of around 100 funders, including private foundations, community foundations, corporate giving programs, giving circles, all sorts of folks in this region who are making charitable contributions to great work that's happening. And our work in the last several years has included developing and sharing an understanding of the historic source of philanthropic wealth and its accountability to Native American people. I wish to commend the Council on including Native and tribal representation on the Land Equity Task Force, and in particular note my support of Ms. Emily Burgueño of the Ipai Nation of Santa Isabel, who's been a valued partner to us as we learn together and create environments in which we can acknowledge historic and present-day settlement and colonization of places, people, systems, governments, which I know SGC intends to continue with this task force. In our experience, and the point I really came here to make today is that representation is important, but the impact of an individual can only be realized when the environment in which they exist has been designed to specifically be conducive to their voice and their perspectives being heard and acted on. So I urge the task force to have this in mind and listen to the members about modifications in practices and policies about how business gets done that achieves that goal of inclusion. So thank you to everyone who's stepping up to serve on this task force and to everyone who has brought it to the point it is today. And thank you for prioritizing the inclusion of Native and tribal people in the stewardship of this land that they have inhabited since so long before us.
Thank you, Megan. Our next commenter is Cheyenne Stone. Cheyenne, are you with us?
Hey, can you hear me?
We can hear you. We will begin your
awesome.
2 minutes now.
Perfect, thank you. Manahu Inaniane Cheyenne Stone Panatu Nu Agimana, Nu Novidu Payuhunadu Nu Ihim. My name is Cheyenne Stone. I'm a member of the Big Pine Paiute tribe. I'd first and foremost like to thank everyone for their time and energy today in making a lot of policy work for our underrepresented and rural communities. I come to you today from the Big Pine Reservation, and I'd like to thank Jamie as well as Paul Towers from the Community Alliance of Family Farmers, because they were really instrumental in showing me how policy as well as advocacy and lobbying can help make a difference. So I thank you to my CAF colleagues for their instrumental voices in allowing me the opportunity to be here today. I also like to thank the Strategic Growth Council. I'm honored to be here today. With that said, I can't wait to see what the next 3 years will advocate for. I think a lot of you guys spoke today, whether it's your 9 to 5 job that you're speaking on behalf of a lot of underrepresented and Indigenous people, as well as paving policies that allow for grant funding to be out here in the rural areas. And part of that is equitable development, as well as strategic planning, and really thinking about how you can make a difference in people that don't always have a voice at the table. So with that said, I would like to express I'm super excited about the opportunity to join the Strategic Growth Council and helping develop the new task force for the agriculture land equity mission, as well as joining everybody in their support for sustainable agriculture, as well as bringing traditional use really to the platform, because prior to contact with being colonized as an Indigenous person, land and property, that is the last thing we think about. If anything, we think about where we gather, where we get our resources, how we interweave a lot of these natural resources for the sustainability of not only the ancestors that allowed us to be here today, but putting forth a lot of these mechanisms that will sustain us for our future generations to basket weave or to harvest our traditional medicines. With
Cheyenne,
that said,
your 2 minutes are up. Can we have your final thoughts, please?
Final thoughts. I just want to stress the importance of providing stipends of at least $500 per meeting to the task force members. We have been made aware of the statutory barrier that would limit the stipends to $100 per meeting, which I believe is insufficient and inequitable. We believe that there are funds available for larger stipends. Participating in bodies that look like these require a significant amount of time, advocacy beyond what $100 could measure. I would appreciate it if you guys could consider a larger stipend to ensure a more equitable access to the communities and the people advocating for communities for change. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Janet Valenzuela. Janet, are you there? We can come back to Janet and move to Melody Ng. Melody, are you with us?
Hello.
Hello, who do we have?
Hi, this is Janet.
Hi, Janet. Your 2 minutes begin now. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. Good afternoon, Chair and members. My name is Janet. I'm with the Los Angeles Food Policy Council out in unceded Tongva territories, and I'm here today to really express my strong support for the selected members of the Agriculture Land Equity Task Force and the excitement that this brings to see the Strategic Growth Council officially form and address one of the biggest and most pressing challenges facing justice in agriculture. I do want to stress the importance of providing stipends of at least $500 per meeting to task force members. We have been made aware of a statutory barrier that would limit the stipends to $100 per meeting, which we believe is insufficient and at times inequitable. And I believe there are funds that could be made available to those who need larger stipends. And just wanted to point out that participating in bodies like these requires significant time, labor, and personal costs. And it's important to acknowledge that underserved communities are often underrepresented due to lack of financial support to cover the costs associated with participating. So providing fair compensation is a critical step to correct this inequity, and many existing bodies have found ways to compensate members at rates of $500 or more, and I strongly urge the SGC to do the same. And thank you for your time.
Thank you. We'll go back to Melody Ng. Getting word she hopped off. Go instead to Mariana Zavala. Mariana, are you with us?
Hi, can you hear me?
We can hear you. Your 2 minutes begin now.
Excellent, thank you. Hi, everyone. Thank you for offering the time and space. My name is Mariana Zavala. I work for the Contra Costa Resource Conservation District, and we do work in unceded Ohlone territory in the East Bay. We work largely with BIPOC, urban, indigenous producers and land stewards, and I am calling in today to echo the words of my colleagues and my friends in regards to the Agricultural Land Equity Task Force and the importance of decreasing the barriers to increasing the stipends for participants. Barriers like this are something we see on a daily basis in our work, where we are asked to provide resources for quote unquote underserved farmers and land stewards who we try to reframe and say they are historically disenfranchised, and a big part of shifting that system is being able to pay folks for their time and their energy and their knowledge, and understanding that they bring more than just their physical bodies to the space, but they bring their stories, their ancestors, and their history. And that is something that cannot be minimized in any way. So once again, just to make a final point, stressing to the Strategic Growth Council the importance of providing stipends of at least 500 per meeting to the task force members. And thank you to all the task force members who will be doing this work, and to folks that have done the work to get this started. And that's all. Thank you.
Thank you. That concludes public comment on this item.
Great. I will now open it up for council comments. Chancellor Munoz, this is your chance. I think you wanted to put a motion on this one earlier.
There was a text that I was going to read. It's not here anymore. Or just to make a motion?
Would you like to make a motion?
Well, yes, but I thought that,
oh, yes, so this would be
there was some obligatory, just trying to be compliant. Well, I'd like to make
the motion would be
motion that we council appoint the nominees recommended by SGC staff to serve on the California Agricultural Land Equity Task Force. Very spontaneous.
Perfect.
I would second that.
Great.
I'd second that.
Wait, second, any discussion? Virginia.
Of course, CDFA has thoughts on this. So first of all, I want to just acknowledge all the talent and experience that is clearly present within the nominees. We've, some of these folks, your reputations precede you, and we're really excited to have you. I also really want to thank the nominees for their interest and acknowledge the significant time commitment over the next 3 years, and how meaningful it is for them to be putting this time and energy into this, and how hard it is to be away from your small farming business. So thank you for that. I also want to acknowledge that this is a really important issue facing not only California and our farms and ranches, but nationwide. We know that in the next 15 years, 40% of America's agricultural land, 40%, is going to be transitioning as many farmers retire. We're still waiting for the latest Census of Agriculture, which was the 2022 census. But from the 2017 census, at that time, the average age of the US farmers was 57.5 years old. And even then, while we were starting to see increases in the diversity of farmers, for example, the number of farmers under 35 had increased 11% since the 5 years before. Women operated farms had increased 23%. The number of Hispanic producers had increased 13%, and both Asian and Black producers increased 5%, and American Indian and Alaska Native produced 10%. So sorry for all the statistics. So I think that we are seeing a lot of interest from people in getting into farming, but it's not easy in California, especially where the land values are so high. We know that across the country, including in California, there's a lot of consolidation of farmland that's happening. And we know that when consolidation occurs, there are fewer farms available for everyone, but that farmers of color have historically been the ones to be squeezed out first. We also know that large farms are more likely to be rented than owned, and that there are trends towards using farmland as investments for things like pension funds, and that rented land is less likely to be farmed with healthy soils practices that require year-over-year investments in the land. And in fact, in 2020, CDFA released a farm equity report led by Thea Rittenhouse, our farm equity advisor. And that report found that unstable land tenure and lack of access to long-term leases was a principal barrier to implementing conservation practices or folks becoming certified organic. And additionally, contributed to increased risks in farm businesses as they're for their planning and long-term sustainability. Sometimes we see leases as short as 3 years, and that's just, that is our minimum length of time for our Healthy Soils program. And it's meant to be the start of something, not the end of something. So I hope that the task force is going to take a look at not only land ownership, but also the length of leases and the possibilities for leases even on public land where appropriate, as well as opportunities in urban areas. We know there's a lot of interest in urban agriculture, and we have a colleague at UC Cooperative Extension who's taken a hard look at different zoning in urban areas and has a list of potential solutions and effective policies for promoting urban ag all thought of. So we hope that the task force will talk about that too. So all of that said, many family farms still account for the vast majority of U.S. farms. But what often happens is that a mid-sized farmer sells their land and it's purchased by a bigger farm. So all these drivers are really complex, but I'm really grateful for this task force and the work that you're going to help do to elucidate the factors affecting access in California and help us find solutions. I also want to say thank you so much to Sean Kennedy for organizing this process. It's been a lot, and for putting up with all our pestering from CDFA, and just thank you again. And that's all, Chair.
Great, thank you for the background. Nicole? Oh. Boy.
I want to say that in this whole process, I learned a lot from CDFA. And so thank you, Virginia and Thea, for all of your expertise. And Sean, also from just all the key staff meetings. I know it's been a lot. So I just want to say thank you for your patience, and I'm really, really excited for the next 3 years.
Yes, Lourdes.
No. Well, okay, we will share a mic here. Mr. Chair, thank you. I have a question regarding the item that was brought up during public comment regarding the statute preventing an increase to the stipend. Can staff explain that with further detail? Thanks.
Yes, Secretary, and if I misstate anything, please jump in. So essentially with stipends, there are 2 statutory thresholds. The first is that you have to have the statutory approval to do a stipend. And then at that point, it is at $100 per day. Then to go beyond the $100, you require a different statutory threshold that then just states what that the amount would be above 100. So what we have within this bill is the approval to do a stipend, but not the approval to go above the $100.
The only modification I would make is this. So the authorization was put forward in budget bill language, and it doesn't lay out quite as broadly as another body might have been laid out in statute. And so Lynn is correct that any authority for statutes needs to be independent and specific in statute for the ability to go above the otherwise applicable threshold. And that otherwise applicable threshold is, I believe, $100. I'd have to check, but we can also follow up with the council offline and afterwards to establish what information needs to be developed or shared afterwards, and what the task force could develop and approach at their first meeting to take full advantage of authority under the current law, and then what would need to change in order for any additional stipends to be provided above the current limit.
Please.
Very much would appreciate staff follow-up and to circle back with the council, maybe through the chair, regarding options. I understand we're in a very difficult fiscal environment at the state, and there's that consideration. But I also recognize, as several members pointed out, that it's important for us to ensure that there's good participation and that we're addressing any barriers, particularly any economic barriers that prevent certain members from being able to be at the table, right? They're making time to serve, to assist us with the various mission priorities as established by by this committee. And I do think that when we speak about equity, we need to also think about how we're continuing to remove economic barriers that prevent certain groups from being fully active participants in decision making.
Great. I'll just make a brief comment. Unlike Virginia, I don't know much about agriculture. I can barely keep houseplants alive. I use those plastic even for cactus so that I don't kill them. But I eat food every day at least. And I really know some of the challenges that exist around land use, including for agriculture. And I also know how a lot of the work that we do, whether it's housing as a climate strategy, which we'll talk about, or any equity issues, are all interrelated, and they also intersect with a sustainable and equitable use of our land for agriculture, especially as so many other uses are competing, and then a lot of the challenges for people who don't have those opportunities and access. So that's why I'm excited about this, although I don't know much about the actual practice, but I know how important it is. So that I also want to thank the people who actually volunteered to serve on this task force. It's going to be an important work, and the incredible work by staff actually identifying really a great and diverse group of nominees for this job. I'm really excited that we've gotten to this place. And I know Karen was here. She'll be talking for about 2 hours about this. So great. So with that, we have a motion from Chancellor Munoz and a second from Secretary Crawford, I believe. So should we go to roll call? Unless, is there anybody else?
Mr. Chair, if I might have a question.
Frank, sorry.
Matt, I think I heard you say that that there may be viable options to the statutory limitation of $100 meeting per diem, and that such a vehicle might be some kind of a stipend arrangement. And I thought I also heard you say that the task force may, once it convenes, come up with some options, and then through our SGC staff present to this council some options. To the extent that that's true, that leads me to these types of questions. When is the task force going to begin to convene? And when might somebody come to this council with some options?
We can provide the state of the options as they exist today to the council right away. The ability of the task force to independently set a stipend within the current bounds of $100 exists, and that would be something that they'd have available at meeting 1 to set. Any additional statutory authority to go above and beyond that wouldn't necessarily need to come back to this council. We could, at a different time, it would have to get into statute independently, and there's not, it's not currently in statute, and it would have to be passed via legislation that is yet to be introduced. So we'll have the state of the current options available for this council to review very shortly. The task force itself is meeting in June, tentatively set for June 23, and that's when they'd be able to avail themselves of the options as they currently exist.
Great. One more, Nicole, please.
Right, because I was so compelled because of your comments explaining what the issues are. And it was particularly noteworthy that there was a lack of youth representation. And that's exactly what I heard from you is what is needed to keep the farming industry going in California, is young people to believe it's a viable option for a career path. And so to me, that just speaks to the need for finding stipend that actually makes it worthwhile. So I'm just sort of encouraging the folks who called in, if they're still on the line, that you can still push for legislation in this session. There are people who have bills that are, I don't even know the right terminology for it, but there's placeholder type bills. So if there are people who represent the agricultural areas and are sensitive to this issue, you might be able to get something passed that could open the door to a greater stipend. So I'm really just speaking to the speakers at this point. But anyhow, I just thank you for educating us about why this issue is so pivotal. And I learned a lot and I believe it. So thanks. And thanks to the staff for making this happen.
Wade.
Well, I would just acknowledge this question of stipend as part of a bigger issue, which is we have hundreds of entities across the state that serve in this type of role. I can think of dozens across our agency that are limited by this $100 stipend. So I think points made by commenters today are entirely valid. And there's a question around, making this change vis-a-vis all of those other bodies to which these comments are germane. So I just want to, recognize it's part of a bigger question or issue, but certainly as laid out, there are opportunities through a law change to amend this particular stipend.
Great feedback. Just, I guess I thought of one more when the discussion about youth started surfacing. I'm just wondering, this is for SGC staff, since the task force doesn't have enough representation as they are starting their work, is there a way to support potentially getting youth organizations or youth groups to be somehow engaged in their conversation from outside?
Certainly, thank you. As part of this, as you saw, we had a great slate of nominees there. Within the nominees that were put forward, there were some specific areas of expertise that seemed better suited to a technical advisory committee than serving on the task force itself. But I think through that mechanism, there could be options to engage with youth-focused organizations as well to bring that specific expertise and perspectives to bear on that process. But we are, this is a task force that's meeting quarterly, that's being supplemented, as we spoke about, I think it was in October, some action-oriented research projects and other activities there that could also focus primarily on youth perspectives in that as well. So we have, there's the formal quarterly task force, but supplemented with these other activities that I think really could help there.
So with that, we'll go to roll call.
Thank you. Director Acefa?
Enthusiastically, yes.
Secretary Castro Ramirez? Yes. Secretary Crowfoot?
Yes.
Secretary Mashakin?
Yes.
Deputy Secretary Barino Rivera?
Yes.
Deputy Secretary Jameson?
Yes.
Undersecretary Meach? Public Member Capretz?
Yes.
Public Member Cardenas?
Yes.
Chancellor Munoz?
Aye.
Motion passes.
Great. Great, so we'll now move to item number 7, for which I'm just as equally, if not more, excited about. This is a discussion of the council priority number 3, housing, climate, and equity draft work plan. So I'll call Lynn and Sean again to present on this item.
Great, thank you, Chair. And so as mentioned, we are really excited today to bring to you the draft work plan for Council Priority 3, which is the Housing, Climate, and Equity Resolution work plan. So if you'll remember, back in December, we brought forward this ambitious, yet I think very, very important and very, very timely conversation about how we as a council could be working across all of our different spaces to really advance and accelerate the work related to climate equity housing in the state of California. And I think it's one of these moments where when we started to really think about it, it felt very foundational to our work as the Strategic Growth Council to be thinking about how do we accelerate strategic growth in the state? How do we work across our different silos, our different programs, our different policy areas, looking at what we already have in place through the legislature, through the programs, through the different subject matter expertise and communication channels that exist, and how do we work to really meet the moment and accelerate moving from policy and policy and planning to action. And so when we then took this resolution forward to develop an action plan, I think we really started with this conversation of what does success look like? What does it look like at the end of the 2-year timeframe that we've set for this action plan? And what we think it is that it's starting with a really shared vision and narrative around why strategic growth is so, from a value-based perspective, is so important for California and for Californians. What does it really achieve when we think and when we implement in a way that makes lives health, that makes the world healthier, that makes life more livable, and that helps communities thrive? So we also think from a metrics perspective, it's a lot about acceleration. It's about being able to look back and say that tangibly, we looked at what we had at our plate and we found ways to be able to deconflict, to align, to coordinate, to communicate, and to make sure that we helped local implementers be as successful in achieving these goals as possible. So I'm really excited to hand it over to Sean, who will go through and share the draft work plan, and really look forward to the discussion before we start launching this work in full. Oh, and I'm sorry, I do also want to make one quick note as well. So as we're going through the work plan, and I will, and you'll see in this document, it is built and foundationally structured and supported by so many groups that are already working on these topics. There is so much that's happening around the state, within working groups, at agency levels, within departments, across programs. And part of the goal here is to really lift up and bright light and make very clear publicly all this work that's happening at the state. So I think as you see the work plan, you'll see a lot of it's already happening. And this is then really augmenting and supporting the work that's in place already. And so with that, I'll invite Sean to come and walk through it.
Good afternoon again. I think Chair Assafa's point was important too, that this is, shifting hats for me, but is also linked to the previous item in very important ways, and trying to think beyond housing as a climate strategy purely in context of infill development, to think about what this means at the regional scale, how we can start thinking about that relationship between agriculture, conservation, infill, all through this climate lens, also through an equity lens, which I think is really exciting. If we could go to the next slide, please. I just want to provide a bit of an overview of how we developed this work plan. So as Lynn mentioned, we've now, on the back of the resolution being passed back in December, had developed a 2-year work plan, really designed to operationalize the goals that were set forth in that priority. This is drawn on a variety of sources, including a review of existing recommendations that came through the SB 150 report on the sustainable community strategies, AB 285, the transportation assessment, CAPTI, some other important pieces of work that exist that already, some 250 odd recommendations that we sorted through to then think about, what is really getting at this housing climate nexus? What are some things that are feasible to do today? And also then what is within the bounds of what this council can achieve. We supplemented that review of existing recommendations with input gathered through a request for information. This was operated internally through agencies and also centered around, I would say, 400 individual stakeholders across the state. We had very limited uptake on the external part of this, only 12 formal responses, which we attribute to, as in our other discussions with CBOs, are really overburdened currently with requests coming from federal and state level for input into processes like this. And there also wasn't any money involved in responding. So I think that explains that. But in response to that, we have incorporated an action into the work plan that really aims to engage better with under-resourced communities in a way that doesn't add additional burdens. So as Lynn mentioned, we're talking about success here too, trying to do two things throughout the work plan. One is to elevate a lot of the existing work that's happening and improve coordination, but we're also trying to flip the script a little bit and change the way that the state engages with those who are often tasked with implementing state policy. So understanding what the state landscape looks like from the perspective of a local or regional government, from a community-based organization, from a homeowner who might be considering options for densifying the plot that they're currently on. So this is the real message there of trying to, again, understand the perspective of those who are tasked with implementation so that we can then advance and accelerate all this great work that is currently underway at the state level. Next slide, please. So the work plan structure is organized around 3 goals, which I'll talk about briefly in a moment. Each goal is supported by 2 to 3 strategies, and each strategy then has a few actions for implementation. Each action is associated with a timeline of either 1 year or over a 2-year period. And for a number of the actions, we have outlined lead and supporting entities. And one thing that we'll be asking for clarity on in the discussion is to help fill those gaps in the work plan and really looking for input from your agencies to see positions in which you feel you'd be comfortable leading some of these efforts. Next slide, please. So the first goal is really about ensuring that what exists and what we're currently doing in the state is really being utilized to its full potential. So some key actions we're doing here is one, to first compile an inventory of existing policies and programs that exist at that housing and climate nexus. Importantly here, using the council as a mechanism through which to elevate existing work. And the third strategy there really focused on identifying and removing barriers. So key to that is providing technical assistance and capacity building, but also ensuring the data tools that we've developed across all the agencies present here are more accessible and integrated in a way that they can be utilized to a greater extent. Next slide, please. The second goal is really focused not just on what we're currently doing, but what else do we need? Identifying additional tools and strategies to meet the state's housing and climate goals at the pace that is really required at this time. So continuing to provide opportunities for public input, so further delving into the responses that we received through that RFI process, using the council again as a mechanism to concentrate on these efforts at least annually. And then as we go through these efforts, having a centralized repository rather of additional tools that could inform efforts moving forward. And goal number 3. So here, goal number 3 really focused on improving coordination and information sharing. So here, strategy 1, I think, is particularly important to call out, to actively engage California Native American tribes and under-resourced communities in this housing climate process. So working with Governor's Office of Tribal Affairs and California Tribal Chairpersons Associations to develop a framework for engagement, building on work that's already underway at SGC, focused on technical assistance for tribes. And also looking at other examples we can leverage SGC's work here, the BOOST program that was central to Needles receiving the pro-housing designation, for example. How can we help accelerate these efforts and leverage those across the state? And finally, is helping to navigate, as you're all aware, we have this fire hose of federal funding coming at us, opportunities to ensure that that funding opportunity actually matches needs and can be used to produce the kind of projects in the places where they're going to be most useful. Again, central through an equity lens there. So we have some established relationships, for example, with the Milken Institute here that we partnered with the Catalyst Conference, helping to elevate their work, and some others noted there. Next slide, please. So our next steps, firstly, is to prioritize and refine the strategies and actions in here. As we noted, there's some 20-odd, almost 30 actions in there. So helping to refine those. As Lynn mentioned, to define clear metrics for those. We have a general narrative overall that we're trying to achieve with this effort, but some of those to measure the acceleration and the progress towards that we'll be focusing on next. And then finally, as I mentioned, helping to confirm the remaining lead entities for some of this work. Next slide, please. There are three questions for discussion today. The first, which strategies and actions do you believe will have the most significant impact in meeting the objectives of Council Priority 3? Secondly, in which strategy areas is your agency best positioned to take a leadership role? And finally, in which areas would you like to see greater emphasis? Thank you.
Thank you, Sean and Lynn, for presenting this. I would open it up to council discussions on those three questions. Got that on the screen. So, Lourdes.
Have to use your mic again. We're sharing mics today. Thank you, Mr. Chair. First, I appreciate serving on this priority number 3 as a co-chair or co-champion, I would say, with Secretary Garcia and Councilmember Capretz, and very much appreciate the process that led to the creation of this work plan. We were fully engaged. We were asked for input not only as champions, but also bringing in our teams to ensure proper alignment and that the work plan actually reflected the work that is already taking place in some cases across state agencies. And very much appreciate, Lynn, you highlighting that point, right? That some of this work is happening across the state government and in local communities. And the intention behind this priority and the intention behind this work plan is to move more quickly, to move faster, to be more strategic, to be well positioned when funding from the feds comes in or when we have other available dollars. And also to pitch to philanthropy, to pitch to other funders to support the work of the Strategic Growth Council, the work of agencies across state government that are really focused on strategic growth with a commitment to equity, with a commitment to developing equitable communities. We had an extensive conversation on this at UC Merced. Chancellor, thank you again for hosting us several months back, where we heard directly from folks on the ground that are working on housing as a platform to opportunity, that are looking at housing as health and housing as climate, that are connecting the dots and working towards creating more livable communities. So again, I'm excited. The work plan is very comprehensive. There are a lot of objectives, as you all saw, I think over 25. And there's clarity around timing. There's clarity around who's leading what. And there will be an opportunity, of course, right, for us to assess how things are coming along, and also to course correct if we need to do that. So I really appreciate that this is not approving this does not mean that we're not going to make any tweaks or changes along the way. With regard to the questions, to the three questions, a few things that I would say in terms of the first question: which strategies and actions do you believe this work plan will lead to, I guess, greater impact? And as the agency that works closely with a number of departments to carry out the governor's priorities in the housing space, I would say continuing to do everything possible to create more housing in communities, to create more housings that are more closely connected to jobs, that are more closely connected to transportation, and also that we're continuing to lead with equity, and equity in housing oftentimes is fair housing, right? Making sure that we're creating housing in well-resourced communities, and also investing in under-resourced communities so that residents have the opportunity to enjoy what maybe other communities that are better resourced have. Secondly, I think that, I would acknowledge the importance of being inclusive and bringing tribal leaders, tribal nations. We are doing much more collectively across state government to be more intentional in terms of the government to government relationship that we have with tribal nations. We know that housing needs in tribal communities is also significant. And so I appreciate the way, the manner in which the work plan calls attention to that and the commitment there. I also would say that to the second question, which is in which strategy area is your agency best positioned? I sort of talked about housing, but beyond housing, I would say we are very much working across state government to address, to prevent, address, and end homelessness. And when we think about people experiencing homelessness, right, the impact to not having a place, a dignified place to call home, the impact of climate change, the impact of it's essentially a moral imperative, right? So I think that just because we have three co-champions, maybe the point here is that this work plan reflects the work from everyone that's on the council, including the work that we are fully engaged with our colleagues in Health and Human Services in connecting housing investments to services and connecting housing to be more fully integrated into communities. And then the last point in terms of which areas would you like to see greater emphasis? We're doing a lot of very good work at the state, a lot of good work in the space of connecting dots, connecting housing, transportation, equity, climate. I think we need to do maybe a better job, and Council Member Capretz shared this during our recent conversation. We need to do a better job finding ways to communicate and reach people in our communities about what it is that we're doing. And when I say people, I'm talking about my parents, my neighbors, the folks that sometimes the manner in which we speak, right, about these issues can be intimidating or can be nebulous or complex. And so finding ways to be able to talk to people in community about the work that is happening to improve the livability, the walkability, to create housing that is affordable and dignified so that people can reach their potential.
Great, thanks, Secretary. Mark.
Wanted to applaud you all for pulling this together. I think one of the things that, Lynn, I'd love to follow up on is to try to figure out how we add more of the health and human services aspects to this, and think about ways in which we begin to embed some of the things that we're already working on, whether that's the expansion of our Medicaid work and the leveraging of Medicaid to not just be health insurance, but really beginning to pay for some of those social drivers of health, access to transportation, roof over your head, those types of things, and being able to kind of think about this from that perspective. So it's great if we build new housing. To the Secretary's point, I think making sure that people are capable and able to stay housed is another component of kind of how we think about the services that we offer and ways in which we bring it together. The only other point that I would make is, one of the things that I find frustrating is that people that we all collectively serve don't live their lives in silos, and yet we deliver these programs in these very complicated silos. Even within our own organization, we know that most people end up getting access to 5 different programs across 5 different departments within our agency. And we treat them in those bureaucratic silos, but we don't treat it as a whole person, one door kind of wraparound. One thing to think about as you begin to look at kind of the recommendations and the strategic priorities is how do you create those playbooks for local communities to begin to break down the silos and begin to blend and braid dollars between the BCSH funding opportunities and the HHS funding opportunities, the CalStat funding opportunities, and our opportunities to begin to think about how do you begin to serve a whole community, whole person approach, rather than we're just focusing on the housing piece or the transportation piece or the mental health piece, but how do we actually see the whole person and their needs and wrap ourselves more holistically as a government around them? And I think where the council could probably, where SGC as a whole could lend itself benefit is to give people the playbook to show this is how you at the local level can begin to blend and braid those dollars to better serve the whole person and the whole community. So I would encourage, and we are happy to lean in at HHS to begin to help kind of think through how we stitch together those pieces to tell that story, to Secretary Castro Ramirez's point, of how these programs come together. Because to most people, it's just HHS focused on HHS and BCSH, but it's not. We're really trying to figure out ways in which we integrate some of these things in a more strategic way.
Great. Anyone else? Nicole?
It's hard to know where to begin because there's so much material here. It's hard to get my head around it all. But first, I just want to thank Secretary Castro Ramirez and Secretary Garcia for inviting me to participate in this process. And I really was included and I was at the table, something actually Secretary Crowfoot told me to push for quite a while ago, but I remembered. So it was a very satisfying experience and I'm grateful for it. And obviously staff for your leadership on this. So yeah, I think from my vantage point as a local advocate, a regional advocate, obviously housing is almost all our electeds talk about because we're having homeless crisis, housing crisis, then obviously you layer on top of that climate, transportation, equity, all these other challenges. But housing really is like the nub, that we have to solve. And what we see on the ground are all these competing issues where the local planners and a lot of our local government, in fact, I think the City of San Diego got a pro housing designation because they are trying to do the right thing and build housing in the right place, which is so essential. But the pushback from our existing suburban neighborhoods and suburban bedroom communities is so fierce that they fold the majority of the time, or they walk back some of their initial commitments. But that's that's just tragic on all levels. And it just makes the challenge of getting where we need to go and hitting the state housing goals or our local RHNA goals that much harder. And so, yes, I appreciate that Secretary Castro Ramirez elevated. My concern is that it's hard to communicate why putting housing, having more density, having compact mixed use, walkable, bikeable communities is like the answer on almost every level of all the work that all these cabinet secretaries are doing. It is the nub. And so because everyone that I see, wherever they're at, whatever agency they're at or city they're in, struggles to communicate why that is the solution and all the benefits and opportunities and just increased quality of life they're going to receive. That it then again it pits the electeds against voters, frankly, and it just puts us in an impossible position. So the good news here is that I feel like this process I'm sensing it, I'm feeling it. I love the whole idea of like how we tell the story and how we package everything holistically and like really paint that picture for the community makes me, oh my gosh, I got so excited hearing that. I just loved it. And it's not going to be easy, but I'm going to be thrilled that the state is even trying to do it. And so many of these, it's impossible for me to prioritize these actions because there's so many great ones, but you have, some ideas about educating state government about how the intersection and the nexus of these issues. But I and you know me, I'm always going to say local government, please. I honestly think they crave it, and they want it, and they're seeking help on how to communicate with the public. And I expressed in our smaller conversations that my team, we go even to the community planning group level, and it's just raw, politics and expression of feeling about housing. And it's rough. It's really rough. And then I'm just repeating it for the general audience, but I see the local planners shrink and they lose their confidence and they're very intimidated. And then that just, moves, and that just goes up the chain. And so any tools or resources that we can get to help us sell that this is the right solution, that again, on all facets and all levels, would be fabulous. And I also don't want the state to underestimate how your modeling and ability to capture this vision works. And I know it's like, I don't know how you can measure that exactly, but it matters. I mean, there's just something about it. You have a platform and a bully pulpit that is powerful. And the more and by the way, it's not to say people aren't doing it. I'm just like, we just have to somehow keep doing it, because to use the term everyone knows, the NIMBY faction is so strong, and we push back, but the community groups, the community-based organizations that, we have staff that are doing that and doing advocacy and trying to educate the community still. It's really tough. And then as far as, and I again appreciate Pastor Ramirez elevating, just to make sure that you're talking in a way that's not so academic. That's the term I was looking for. I kind of said jargon, but really it's the academic way the state talks that I think just doesn't resonate. And we, again, just based on our experience at the grassroots, that people don't understand these the terminology, and they're just like, where can I live? And how do I breathe clean air? And is there a bus that's going to take me to my job or not? And am I safe in my community? I mean, these are, they just bottom line it. And I just think that's the way the state has to tell the story about why, these strategies will improve their day-to-day quality of life. But really, I think this is a fabulous start, and I can't wait till the next steps. I saw a lot of the actions I really wanted medium term. I don't know what that means exactly. Is that 6 months, a year? Oh, really? Okay. All right. Sometimes the city that you means 5 years, you never know.
That's right.
It depends on, but anyhow, I do think there's not one elected official in the state of California who doesn't have housing as one of their top priorities. So the work that you do will just, I think, have incredible impact. And then let's see, what else was I going to say? Again, just to reemphasize how housing in the right place also impacts, the greenhouse gas emission raw numbers, because every report we've heard at SGC from CARB and consultants is that the biggest challenge is getting greenhouse gas emission reductions from transportation, and EVs are not going to get us there. Not even touching the fact of how few people can even afford an EV. I actually took a Lyft to the airport, and my driver was in a Kia something, very cool car. And then I don't know why, I feel naive myself. I said, how much was this car? And he's like, oh, the base was 60,000. Wow. I was like, and Kia right now is not eligible for the federal rebates because they're not manufacturing in the United States. But my point being, 60,000, who can afford that? It's, definitely not my price range. And I'm obviously hyper privileged and, the person who should be able to afford that. So anyhow, just meaning, again, EVs are not the panacea, and that the walkable, bikeable, transit friendly communities are essential. So yeah, sorry, I'm talking a lot. That's all I got. I'm particularly passionate about this and excited about it, and grateful that the SGC team has prioritized this and made this a space to have this conversation. So thank you all. And really everybody on this dais I know is doing fantastic work on this subject. So thank you all.
Thank you, Councilmember Capretz. I'm going to take that line. I'm going to bottom line it. How I'm going to talk about the comments that our agency has to say, but your comments are very well taken, and I just appreciate that perspective. A huge champion of language access and plain language first before we talk about any other languages. So I think that's extremely important. I will say that the Cali PA team took a really deep dive into the action items. So to not recount every single action item and the list that they gave me to share with you today, we could send that to you in writing because they really did a thorough analysis of per action and each of the priorities. So I want to clarify and ask if we could do that after the meeting, if that's okay. Great. And so I want to first thank the SGC staff and SGC council members for really elevating this important nexus between housing, climate, and equity. In particular, achieving our greenhouse gas emissions reductions goals is critically linked to our ability to tackle the housing crisis. As the 2022 AB 32 scoping plan indicates, meeting our greenhouse gas reduction targets relies in part on reducing emissions from buildings, reducing emissions from driving, and conserving natural and working lands. All of these objectives have a nexus with housing. We need to meet the state's incredible need to accelerate housing production, and we need to do so in a way that focuses on infill development, building decarbonization, and supporting lower carbon transportation choices in all of our communities. Doing so is not only critical to meeting our GHG, our greenhouse gas reduction targets, it is also critical for the overall health and well-being of all Californians. But it takes significant dedication and coordination across agencies to do so. So I echo the breaking down silos. It's extremely, extremely important. And so I just, on the greater emphasis that we would like to see, the collaboration is extremely important, particularly as it relates to this work plan and really having a public process to talk about it here, and also being able to have feedback from members of the public. I would like to encourage the council to continue to emphasize the importance of advancing new tools and strategies that help us close those gaps in our state and climate equity goals. The council meeting last December, when this resolution was discussed, Secretary Garcia underscored the fact that while we are making incredible progress on many fronts, more is needed to close our housing, climate, and equity gaps. With the timeline, we have 2 years. We can use this opportunity to take next steps towards advancing bigger and bolder strategies that will help us achieve these goals. Again, there's some specificity that we could go into, but I just want to save that to when we provide that in writing. I would just like to emphasize the importance of taking data-driven approach as we implement all of these actions. Let us focus on actions that analysis and evidence suggest will have the greatest impact as we strive towards our very ambitious state housing, climate, and equity goals. Thank you.
Thanks so much. I'm going to make 3 points. One is that the genesis of the Strategic Growth Council is actually this issue. Over a decade ago, state leaders passed Senate Bill 375 to try to figure out how to steer the necessary growth, land use, housing development in the state in a way that was smart. And that was kind of a label to encompass smart for climate and equity. And I think if we're being honest, over the last decade, one area where we really haven't succeeded is, one, building enough housing, obviously. And then 2 is to reducing the amount of miles that people need to drive to go to their jobs and live their lives. What we know as a wonky term of vehicle miles traveled has actually increased. So I think while California can rightfully identify myriad ways where we're leading the world on climate policy, one area where we continue to have to improve is our land use and our housing development. My second point is that we're making progress. I mean, thanks to Secretary Castro Ramirez, thanks to the governor, thanks to the legislature, the state is driving the development of housing across California communities. And I know it's really tough. And I think Councilmember Capretz, gave us a bit of a reality check on that. But we know that the governor, the attorney general, are driving forward, enforcing requirements that local communities have to build housing. Third point is I'm hoping that the work here can really complement that. and help us across agencies understand specifically how each of us can figure in. I lead an agency that you wouldn't normally associate with housing development, but I know there are ways that we can help or hinder the development of housing. So as the staff implements all of these actions, I would look to you to engage us on the secretary level to figure out, or to help us figure out, what are the few things that we can do, using our political authority to help Secretary Castro Ramirez, help the governor, help the legislature do what we all want to do, which is build more housing and build it in the right places, in the right way for all Californians. Thanks.
Thanks. Anyone else? Well, I'll go. And I said this is one of the exciting part of the priorities for me, in part because as a land use planner, I've worked all my life on these kinds of issues. Or more importantly, I think some of the topics discussed here, but the last one by Wade. Well, first of all, thank you for that history of SGC and government speed. 10 years is really quick. 10 years later, we're really addressing it here. But what is really important is what has really taken place over the last 4 years around housing policy from a legislation perspective, housing funding from a from funding perspective in California. It's unmatched by any throughout the country. I say that because I think the governor talks about it often as well. He was mayor of a city, and when he was mayor, there weren't that many resources for local jurisdictions from the state. He says he didn't even expect that he should ask at that time, to address homelessness, to address housing, to address climate. And there's significant amount of them over the last 4 years. In our lifetimes, we're not going to have that kind of alignment to really make the big impact on connecting the dots on housing production, housing type, and all the other interrelated climate, equity, and all of those issues. So this is where I think for me, everything comes kind of together, because the decisions we make about how we use our land, whether it's about agriculture or housing, again, touches everything else, from equity, from climate, from access to opportunity, from livability, vehicle miles traveled, all of them. I think all of them come together here. So that's why I'm really excited about it. It is an incredible, opportune time to be able to, for us, especially this body, to really make a big dent and a really visible result in 2 years in terms of what comes out of this process. In part because, not only because we're in this incredibly special, momentous moment, but because there are so many other programs already, and with our colleagues' office, from including transportation, a lot of focus now about how to be not only sustainable, but how to link transportation investments intentionally to encourage and address housing. CNRA keeps taking land away for natural resources. So we have to start looking for places to build. So it's important, behooves us that we coordinate across these agencies by connecting the dots. We can protect the land, we can create significant amount of natural resources, and we can build significant amount of housing. That what is missing, I think, in a way, is maybe there are too many policies and too many legislation and even too much money. But the role of coordinating and communicating is a critical missing gap. That's why I think from your questions, discussion items on number 1, which strategies, and this has been repeated again and again, I think the idea of connecting the dots across all interrelated actions that impact housing and climate that are taking place and being able to lift that up. I think no other body in state agency is better positioned to do that. We have 7 state agencies that impact those represented here. And there's no reason, I think, through this process, we cannot really help connect the dots and then translate that in people's speak, even for government agencies, because we all, even internally, speak different languages because we're framed by, natural resources or agriculture or transportation. I know we're breaking that silo. The leadership is, for sure, that state government is a behemoth, and a lot of the interest and the actions are done not only under secretary, but the people who work within those agencies and all the programs, the people who do the real work. So communication is really critical across, I think, those institutions. It is also important to communicate externally as well, the public who are directly either impacted by it or have direct interest, whether it's the building industry or the drivers or the cyclists or whomever. I think that kind of communication and coordination is critical. I think this program has a lot of opportunities to make a big dent from that perspective. So from my perspective, for number one, that coordination, communication across all interrelated government and private and local jurisdictions is important. On your question number two, what our agencies, I think OPR would be well positioned to really help impact connecting with local jurisdictions because we engage from a land use perspective and on general plans of local jurisdictions. Most of them are incredibly burdened over the last 4 years because of incredible actions that have come out of the legislations, either our regional housing goals that they have to meet, or the funding that they have to apply for, or any number of both carrots and sticks legislation that have gone out to address housing. There is a lot that they're dealing with. So I think it behooves us for us to be able to help them navigate or connect with local jurisdictions. At the end of the day, decisions are made, at cities and at local jurisdictions. On the third item, in which areas would you like to see greater emphasis? I would say in the first two that I talked about, and then really being able to identify any missing gaps or tools that could actually fill the gap. What I know is all of these issues are changing really fast, just as climate is changing really fast. So the tools and knowledge from 5 years ago may not be relevant today, especially around being able to identify the balance between the right places to build and the right places concurrently help protect, whether it's agriculture, rural land, or opportunities for other natural resources. So really working on the gaps in the tools. And then on to sort of overall, we only have 2 years timeline for this to be really realistic about what is it at the end of that goal that we can show this process has helped move the ball significantly in achieving this goal. So those are my feedback. There's any Virginia.
Well, I just wanted to point out another thing that SGC has done really, really well, and maybe this came out of the way the council was conceptualized with the establishment of the 375 that Wade mentioned, but which is the connection between the Affordable Housing and Sustainable Communities program and the SALC program, which is really a subset of AHSC, and the way that those two programs are linked, that we're trying to have housing that is connected to transit, and also as a subset of that program, then protecting land on the urban edge, based on the premise of greenhouse gas reduction. So we're trying to save this land, and every time we don't build housing in a green field, we reduce vehicle miles traveled, or we avoid vehicle miles traveled. And so I think that we conceptually started there, and then we brought in experts, and we have experts in conservation on the team, and we have experts on housing on the AHSC team, and all of those things are so there's just so much like education and background and policy and history and each of those things. And so we kind of like moved apart. And then I feel like we've come full circle with this council priority, because when I was working on the SALC program, we started saying, like, we really need to understand housing better. We really need to understand how it's cited and allocated and all of this. And so we started having these conversations in this housing and conservation and now transportation group with SGC key staff. And I've learned so much from my colleagues about how these things work. And so to me, I would just support those opportunities, a strategy one, improving understanding of the landscape and taking advantage of existing opportunities and using the resources that we have. Because I want to point out, like, through the SALC program, we've funded like something like 30 planning grants towards local community planning, and we wanted them to emphasize the conservation of agriculture, but they could do other things in their general plans with those grants. And so I think we should continue to help local communities, find resources like that, and then help them envision scenarios where rural areas are, both conceptualized as an economic and natural resource, but then also provide a lot of technical assistance so that they can reach back across those different areas of expertise. I'm thinking about the technical assistance OPRs classically provided through general plan guidelines and templates, and then through newer efforts that we have going on, like 30 by 30 and the SURF program. So I just think this has kind of been here the whole time for the Strategic Growth Council, but this is bringing it back to the forefront that we're trying to do all of these things at once, and it's really, really hard. So thanks everyone for your work.
Anyone else from council? Oh, Frank.
The Undersecretary Jameson, Deputy Secretary, Deputy Secretary Jamerson, I think is quite correct. This has always been here. In the 15 years since SB 375 came into existence, it has been the congenital charge of the Strategic Growth Council, it seems to me, to deal with wicked problems. And it's a good thing, because wicked problems are the only ones we seem to have in California anymore. And that's why I appreciate so much public member Nicole's suggestion that people throughout the state look to the governor's team, all of you guys, for leadership and housing and equity and meaningful climate action now is what you're called to lead on. And as far as words and statements of intentionality go, if anyone doubts the stated, and I think earnest commitment of the secretaries who are charged with carrying out this governor's vision, which is, I think, our shared vision as a state of an equitable and hopefully sustainable future for children that yet unborn. One need only look to the very forceful comments that were offered by, I think, in principle, the other two champions of this particular policy objective, Secretary Castro Ramirez and Secretary Garcia, at our December meeting, when the resolution to bring this really into being and lift it up was unanimously adopted, because what we heard from our two secretaries was a no holds barred commitment to drive within their massive organizations the commitment to make these actions, once they became enumerated, real. Well, now they are enumerated, thanks to Sean and your team. By the way, Sean, the tactic of using a request for information to engage the public and solicit ideas on how members, well, namely those who have fiefdoms, all of you, on how all of you could hold yourselves and each other with our help accountable is just brilliant. It really was. I never heard of that before. To use an RFI in that way, to kudos to you and whoever you got the idea from. And I believe that the work product that you've offered us here has been informed and helped by that RFI process. But words and platitudes are as good as far as they go. But as Deputy Secretary Moises pointed out in part of his comments, it's only so good as the action that actually fulfills them. Years from now, whether or not we've succeeded in our collective housing, equity, and climate action goals will largely revolve around whatever became of these 27 action items. And so there are two in particular, Sean, that I wanted to ask you about. One is action item 3, which is generally the implementation of already existing relevant recommendations that have been made across a slew of policy documents over the last couple of years. And I'm heartened to know that it's apparently the Housing, Transportation, Climate, and Conservation working group subcommittee that is going to take the lead on this. But my question, particularly in light of, I must say, in commiserating with other stakeholders recently about where we are and how Action 3 can actually help us, particularly given Assemblymember Friedman's vision of a codification of many of these policy recommendations was not ultimately accepted. When might we see a timeline as to which of the many policy recommendations that are hanging out there in writing somewhere, when they are going to be prioritized and brought back to this council, when we might see that? And then I have another question about action item number 12.
So maybe if I can answer that question, but also elaborate just a little bit more. I think when I think back about a year ago, and actually Secretary Crowfoot is at the door now, but he gave us a really specific task of tackling the thorny topics for the state. And now I think that's been upped to now tackling the wicked topics. And I see that maybe a boost of confidence in the work that the team is doing, but also a greater sense of urgency for the work that's in front of all of us. And so I think I really appreciate the council champions, Director Cefa, Secretary Castro Ramirez, Secretary Nicole, I'm sorry. The willingness and the ability to kind of break down these silos is not a hard, it's hard. And I think that the leadership model that you're all setting is making this easier and easier for us to imagine being able to achieve these action items. So I think, kind of long story short to your question, we have proposed a very quick time frame with the 2 years because we think there's not another option. If we don't work at this speed, then we miss the opportunity to really have the impact that I think we all know is necessary. So I think in terms of the commitment for the time frame, pretty quickly after this meeting, I think by the time we meet at the next conversation, we can have this mapped out again with the direction and the updates based off of this conversation, as well as then more granularity on the time frame. But two, what I'm hearing also is the importance of bringing this topic back to this council more frequently so that we can, one, be talking about the metrics and the outcomes that we're seeing with this work, but two, be really honest and transparent about what's not working and what is working so that then we can do course corrections and we can also solicit help, support, feedback for places where there's something that we've recognized as a council needs to happen, but we're then also seeing when we then take it to that implementation perspective, there's a logjam. So I think to your question about timeline, we'll bring this back on the next council meeting with a more detailed timeframe, and then we'll also commit to bringing this to the council frequently throughout the year, just as check-ins to continue to move this work forward.
Terrific. Thank you very much. Related question, again, having to do with timeline, because we don't have a lot of time we don't have any time to waste anymore. Action item number 12 speaks to no less than annual reports of our many member agencies, particularly those who are mission critical to our collective resolve. When will these reports, these public reports at these convenings, when will these begin? And do we know who gets to go first?
I'm sorry, who gets to go first? I'm not understanding the question.
Which of our member agencies are who's lining up in the queue to be the first to report on how well we're doing?
Oh, so I think in the way that we were imagining this, it would be as a collective. So it would be looking across the action items in the report and then reporting back in on the action items themselves as opposed to the council member updates. Is there something you would like to see different?
Well, maybe. I don't know. This is kind of stream of consciousness. I was hoping that other options might have been contemplated and raised before us, but if tasked with coming up with one, as I am, what if member agencies that own action items were to take turns coming before the council and the people and saying, this is our action item, we own it, and this is where we are on it?
Well, we can entertain that, and I want to get feedback from our council. I mean, there's some good points there, especially for the question, it goes to question number 2, whether we shift the staff's recommendations unless staff has, any concerns with that. Happy to open it up for discussion. I guess, Frank, your question is whether I think it goes to the earlier comment in terms of accountability as well. I'm just assuming, but the question is whether agencies who lead on the key responsible areas of the actions be the ones who would come back and report where they are on that deliverable, right? Is
that is my suggestion and hope, yes.
I'll open it up, the problem to open it up for discussion. Yeah.
We're very happy to facilitate that process and then would leave it to the council members if they're comfortable with that recommendation.
Okay, so you'll come back with the next meeting to.
Yes.
Great.
Yeah, but I'm all, Frank, I like this. I'm all for understanding what each of us can do and then holding ourselves accountable to do it. I do think really distilling how each agency can support the housing mission that we have is a great idea. And then having us report on that is a great forcing function to ensure that we're accountable.
Lourdes.
Yes. I also think that having the opportunity to do that, couple of things. One, it enables us to also bring other members of our teams that are working on this on these efforts. And going back to the conversation we had regarding communication and lifting up the work, it really creates the forum, right, for having departments, agencies, teams that are working on housing equity, transportation, climate, to be able to communicate, convey, share, and for folks that are joining us in person or virtually, I expect even more feedback, right, as we continue not only to work on priority item number 3, but some of the other efforts. We spent, quite a bit of time discussing the importance of the racial equity hub, and equity is embedded in this. So yes, I think it's a great idea, and so thank you, Councilmember, for suggesting.
Great. So I guess that is direction, and I actually really like it. And the only thing I would add is, as we take individual responsibilities for our areas of expertise, whatever, we also make sure that we connect the dots on Secretary Castro Ramirez takes sort of housing production. You might want to incorporate what about agricultural protection and or, I don't know, natural resources are connected with that specific action item. So if we can connect across. Great. So staff will help facilitate that discussion. Anyone else on this topic? Oh, Nicole.
Brilliant idea. Thank you, colleague, fellow public member. Don't underestimate the public members, no. I also think if we're going to have these open discussions in a public forum, that we could bring in more stakeholders, because there obviously are a lot of thought leaders in this space and all of these areas who have a lot of ideas and thoughts and opinions. But I mean, that's the whole point. I feel like you're forcing everybody to come to the table. And obviously, a lot of these same stakeholders go to the legislature nonstop, and they're pushing their program. But I also think this is, an adjacent forum that it offers an opportunity to talk to the implementers, the people who are executing all the legislation that's getting passed. And I think it's also interesting for many of us to understand what the challenges are that you're experiencing even. Because it's just, there's a lot it's a black box, a lot of it. And so I just love this whole idea, because I think we are kind of opening it up, and I think only positive outcomes can, we don't exactly know what they'll be, but I think offering that space is really valuable. So thank you to the secretaries at least two, who said yes. Well, yeah, I know you're the ones in charge, so it's probably easiest for you all to say it. Yeah, the others are like, I got to text my boss. I can't really say anything, which is totally fair.
I supported the motion. I didn't make any commitments. So we'll focus on that.
Noted.
Great. So incredibly good feedback to staff, and again, great work on this. In interest of time, I'm going to move on. Do we have public comments on this item?
We have one public comment on this item.
Great.
I'll begin the public comment by reading the names of everyone who signed up to comment on this item. We will have in-person public comment first. We have one public commenter signed up, and that is Anthony Carroll. Anthony, are you with us? You may begin your comment.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for having me here today. My name is Anthony Carroll. I'm a field rep and researcher for the NorCal Carpenters Union. I'm having just left a rally for SB4 and SB423, which are two pieces of legislation continuing the fight for more affordable housing built by construction workers earning the wages and benefits they deserve. I really would like to commend the council on the steps they've taken at addressing housing, climate, and equity as kind of a three-pronged solution. As you said, there's no more time to waste. But I think that any discussion on those three topics really does need to, or it will be incomplete if you're not addressing the positive impacts of higher wages, employer-sponsored healthcare, and apprenticeship opportunities, and what they could do for the hundreds of thousands of construction workers throughout the state. For example, the ASIC program leveraged close to $800 million last year and created thousands of residential construction jobs, but your scoring criteria right now still does not prioritize joint apprenticeship training committees and awards full points to workforce development organizations that are not equipped to create pathways to higher paying jobs, do not create the benefit that real state-sponsored apprenticeship programs do. This is despite the fact that completing an apprenticeship or a construction apprenticeship opportunity increases annual earnings by an average of $29,000 per person, and the entire time they're earning or they're being provided health care. And I messed this up. Well, when people earn enough money to live in the communities that they work in, that can A, strengthen those communities, and B, reduce an extra million or so miles of VMTs by people driving hour-plus long mega commutes. Racial equity was mentioned earlier. 75% of construction apprentices come from disadvantaged or low-income communities, meaning that these opportunities are equity drivers. And if you do want to elevate practices that generate the greatest community and individual impacts, which is what your draft plan says, strong labor standards need to be in all of SGC's funding programs and programs in general going forward. Thank you.
Great.
That concludes public comment on this item.
Thank you for that comment. This concludes item 7. Now we'll take on public comment for matters that are not on the agenda. Unfortunately, on this is not a forum for dialogue with the council members. Questions posed by the public during the item during this item cannot be substantively addressed or discussed at this meeting, that any required follow-up can be directed to SGC Executive Director Lynn Bangkok Libert for follow-up answers and connections to relevant staff. So with that, Nat, can we start public comments?
We have 2 public comments signed up, one in person and one virtually. We'll begin with the in-person comment from Michael Harris. If you could approach the podium, please.
I'm really glad to be here. I'm like playing hooky because right down the street, there's a Pan-Africa Global Trade Investment Conference, the 11th. And, I kind of helped put the thing together and I'm not there, but I'm in the right place. So, I'm really knowing I'm in the right place because wicked problems is kind of like what we've been dealing with a long time. So there's about 25 miles from here, there's a town that used to be called Negro Bar. So I'm like the chief of staff of this town, making sure the history of people of African descent doesn't get scrubbed in this current notion of where we want things to be nice. And there was a fire hose of systemic institutional racism where slavery here in California and genocide against the indigenous populations, we don't speak about it. We don't talk about it. And so in some ways, we're worse than those that inflicted that manifest destiny with impunity to kill everything in the river. Anything that had eyes and a coat. The Russians called it Blood River because they killed everything that had a coat. We can't even have salmon anymore. Let me leave that alone. Positive side, we have some coffee and I'm gonna give it to Lynn because I heard the instructions. Some of the best coffee in the world where the original goat that was eating on the ground, he's on the bag. This is the goat that, first coffee in the world was in Ethiopia. And I'll invite all y'all down there. There's 30 countries from Africa represented at this Pan-Africa Global Trade Investment Conference. So if we're gonna take care of this planet, we might wanna go to where the greatest earth and land, deepest part of the earth landmass that doesn't move, Africa, and figure out how we can take appropriate technology there. So
Michael, your 2 minutes are up. Can we have your final thoughts?
My final thought is, God help us all so we can have a planet. And I like your style, man.
Thank you. That concludes in-person public comment. We have 1 person signed up for virtual public comment. That'd be Diane Hall. Diane, if you're with us, can you raise your hand on the Zoom, please? We're not seeing Diane on the Zoom. With that, we'll conclude virtual public comment.
Well, great. Again, I want to thank SGC staff. Really wonderful discussion. My fellow council members and the public commented. I think really great discussion. And then the task force members that were approved. I just want to say congratulations again. With that,